Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofOutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Diana Gabaldon book series to the Stars TV series and everything in between. This is podcast episode 130, week 16 of the Drums of Autumn read-along. Woo! We are in chapters 28 and 29 this week, and I'm calling it Friend or Foe. And the summary goes something like this. Claire tends to the ill men. She tells the stories of their Jamaican adventure. Jamie and William are to be away for a few more days. She and Lord John make conversation. They slowly engage and begin to bond. John is on a personal mission. A visitor brings alarming news. John serves as a protector. They wish Jamie were there. Claire returns to the chores of the ridge. John and Claire deepen their connection. Another visitor, maybe friend or foe, arrives. A terrible and painful discovery is made. Before we continue, I am not going to do Claire's voice at all, except for my own, as I have been for the last couple of years. And the reason for that is I have done Jamie, Lord John, and other characters throughout the different read-alongs, but I've never done Claire. It's because I always had an issue going from Jamie Scots to Claire's English, even though I could do Irish or John's English. I don't know why that was a problem, but I'm not going to do that anymore. And thank you for all your feedback. Basically, you all said, do Claire in your own voice. So I'm listening. That was my gut as well. And I will practice it more between now and the next book. And we will go from there. I'm no Davina Porter. And since Davina basically reads in her voice the whole time as Claire, it makes sense that I read in my own voice the whole time as Claire as well. So thank you for all your feedback. And it's so sweet that you all were apologetic. But no need to apologize. I asked for it, didn't I? Okay, so let's jump in to chapter 28, Heated Conversation. Claire diagnoses young Ian with the measles. To more easily care for him and the still-ailing Lord John, she tucks him into the trundle bed in the cabin. Claire gives a strong cup of willow bark brew to young Ian to help ease his headache, fever, and general pain. Lord John offers to help Claire, but he is still too unwell to do anything of need, like empty a chamber pot. Claire massages young Ian's head in the manner of Yi Tien Cho taught her. That's right. He means Yi Tien Cho, Mr. Willoughby, I explained to Lord John, who was watching the proceedings with a puzzled frown. It's a way of relieving pain by putting pressure on some points of the body. This one is good for headache. The Chinaman taught me to do it. I felt some reluctance to mention the little Chinese to Lord John, seeing that the last time we had met on Jamaica, Lord John had some 400 soldiers and sailors combing the island in pursuit of Mr. Willoughby, then suspected of a particularly atrocious murder. He didn't do it, you know, I felt compelled to add. Lord John raised one eyebrow at me. Claire is glad he was never caught and prosecuted for the murder on Jamaica. Young Ian insists on hearing the story, and Lord John wants to know who the murderer is. Claire is apprehensive to tell the story, but all the players are dead or missing. She also worries for Ian since Geillis had abused him. Nonetheless, Claire couldn't keep the information to herself with the desire in the two males' eyes for the story. Claire proceeds to tell the story of Rose Hall, the witch called Geillis Abernathy, Reverend Campbell, his sister Margaret, the Edinburgh Fiend, Fraser's prophecy, the crocodile, and the slave rebellion. Ian is stunned by the telling of the crocodile. A crocodile? You really saw it, Auntie? I not only saw it, I stepped on it. Or rather, I stepped on it, and then I saw it. If I'd seen it first, I'd have bloody run the other way." There was a low laugh from the bed. Lord John scratched at his arm, smiling. "There could never be a dull life for the Frasers. Certainly not. They are locked and loaded for adventure at every turn." Claire scans the room for weapons and to ensure the door is locked. She's on high alert caring for 2 sick men and Jamie away with William. Claire is concerned over the severity of Ian's headache. Could it be something more dangerous like meningitis or encephalitis? Ian tells Claire how Geillis used stones for different treatments. "Mrs. Abernathy gave me amethyst to drink for the headache," he murmured drowsily. "Amethyst? You drank amethyst?" "Ground up in vinegar and pearls and sweet wine, but that was for the bedding." His face looked red and swollen, and he turned his cheek against the cool pillow, seeking relief. "She was a great one for the stones, yon woman. She burned powdered emeralds in the flame of a black candle, and she rubbed my cock with a diamond to keep it hard, she said." There was a faint sound from the bed, and I looked up to see Lord John raised up on one elbow, eyes wide. "And did the amethyst work?" "The diamond did." He made a feeble attempt at an adolescent's bawdy laugh, but it faded into a harsh, rasping cough. Lord John doesn't know what Geillis did to Ian. Claire offers Ian watered-down wine instead of ground amethyst. Gosh, the idea of wasting gemstones in such a manner. And what would be the point, anyway? Young Ian gratefully takes the wine. He explains further what Geillis wanted from the young boys. If a boy were a virgin, then a proper stone would grow in his intestines or stomach. Ian never learned what she'd wanted it for. There's an unexpected knock at the door. She and Lord John each grab a pistol. It turns out it's Ian's dog, Rollo, at the door. He enters the cabin with great joy. "Beastly dog! Stop that, or I'll make you into a rug, or a coat, or something." Given this threat the attention it deserved, Rollo bounded past me into the room, exuberant with joy. He launched his 150 pounds from the middle of the floor and landed directly on the trundle bed, making it sway dangerously, joints screeching in protest. Ignoring a strangled cry from the bed's occupant, he proceeded to lick Ian madly about the face and forearms, the latter being flung up as a wholly inadequate defense to the slobbering onslaught. "Bad dog," Ian said, making ineffectual efforts to push Rollo off his chest, giggling helplessly in spite of his discomfort. "Bad dog, I say, down, sir." "Down, sir," Lord John echoed sternly. Rollo, interrupted in his demonstrations of affection, rounded on Lord John, his ears laid back. He curled his lip and gave his lordship a good look at the condition of his back teeth. Lord John started and raised his pistol convulsively. Young Ian speaks to Rollo in Gaelic and says, "Take your hairy arse out of my face, you wicked beast." Oh, a boy and his dog. The dog dismisses Lord John at Ian's urging. Rollo snuggles up to Ian. Claire bids them a good night. She moves about the cabin, tidying up from the day's work. She must be exhausted by the number of tasks she has going at once. She finally sits by the fire with her wool basket. It's only been 2 days since Jamie and William left. If nothing hinders them, they'll be back in 4 days. She notes the marked contrast between the wool Jocasta spun and the wool she had spun. Hers is not nearly as nice, you see. She reflects on Jamie's shock over the lack of knitting abilities that Claire has. Jamie had been simultaneously shocked and amused to find that I didn't know how to knit. The question had never arisen at Lollybrook, where Jenny and the female servants kept everyone in knitted goods. I had taken on the chores of still-room and garden, and never dealt with the needlework beyond the simplest mending. "You cannot click it at all. And what did you do for your winter stockings in Boston, then?" "Bought them," I said. He had looked elaborately around the clearing where he had been sitting, admiring the half-finished cabin. "Since I dinna see any shops about, I suppose you'd best learn, aye?" "I suppose so." I dubiously eyed the knitting basket Joe Costa had given me. Poor Claire. Yes, she's good with the needle on human skin. She is in turn shocked herself to find that Jamie knows how to knit. "Well, of course I can. I've known how to click it with needles since I was 7 years old. Do they not teach bairns anything in your time?" "Well, they sometimes teach little girls to do needlework, but not boys." "They did not teach you, did they?" "Besides, it's no fine needlework, Sassenach. It's only plain knitting. Here, take your thumb and dip it so." Poor Claire. Claire knows the basics now, but it's not her favored task. And it is in no way soothing like Jamie and Ian claim it to be. She decides to roll up balls of yarn, an easy enough and mindless task. The smell of newly dyed yarn, mingled with the sense of bodies in the room, is overwhelming to her. She wants nothing more than a sponge bath and bed. There's an Englishman in her bed, and a sick Ian with Rollo in the other. She gets a pallet of quilts and such to sleep on if doctoring Ian doesn't take her attention in the night. Claire suddenly feels pity for all the work she's putting in caring for the ill men and taking care of the ridge on her own. Then just as suddenly, she looks at Lord John, and her ill mood fades. She sees grief and pain on his face. After he recovers and Jamie returns with William, they will leave. Life on the ridge will go back to normal. John and William's life will not. His wife is dead. Claire's ashamed of the unkind thoughts that she had toward him. She offers him tea. They sip silently for a while. Claire breaks the silence, offering condolences on the loss of his wife. He says he was thinking of her then. Claire finds satisfaction in being able to read John's thoughts, because hers are always read by everyone else. John is grappling with his feelings for his dead wife. It's why he came to the ridge. Claire doesn't understand. John thinks Claire is good with children and asks if she has any of her own. We have a daughter." His eyes widened. "We? The girl is Jamie's?" "Don't call her the girl." "Her name is Brianna, and yes, she's Jamie's." "My apologies." "I meant no offense. I was surprised." "And a bit jealous, perhaps?" He had a diplomat's face. Almost anything could have been going on behind that facade of handsome amiability. I went on staring at him, though, and let the mask drop. A flash of knowledge lit the light blue eyes, tinged with grudging humor. "So, one more thing that we have in common." I was startled by his acuity, though I shouldn't have been. It's always discomfiting to find that the feelings you thought safely hidden are in fact sitting out in the open for anyone to look at. "It's getting real up in here." John sincerely tells her his motive was not to put the boy in her face to make her jealous. She believes him. But then why did he come? John is taken with Claire. "You are a rather remarkable woman." "Indeed, I said, not looking up. In what way? He leaned back. I heard the rustle of his bedding. You are neither circumspect nor circuitous. In fact, I don't believe I've ever met anyone more devastatingly straightforward, male or female. Well, it's not by choice. I was born that way. So was I. They are very much alike, aren't they, these two? When the conversation lulls for a moment, she makes an infusion of valerian for sleep, catmint, and wild ginger. Catmint is also can be called catnip. It's the same infusion she'd made for John 4 days earlier. He discloses they heard of Claire's doctoring as they traveled away from Wilmington. Apparently, she's quite well known. They say you're a conjure woman. What is that? Do you know? Anything from a midwife to a physician to a caster of spells or a fortune teller, depending on who's talking. John asks if Jamie and William will be safe. Yes, Jamie wouldn't have taken the boy if he thought there'd be any danger. Surely you know that, if you know him at all. I added, glancing at him. Meow. Claire's claws are out a little bit. I know him. Do you indeed? I said. I know him well enough, or think I do, to risk sending William away with him, alone, and to be sure he will not tell William the truth. No, he won't. You're right about that. Will you? You really think I would? He studied my face carefully for a moment. No, thank you. Now we're getting deep, deep. Claire thinks John is brave for having sent the boy with Jamie. Jamie has held my life in his hands for a good many years now. I will trust him with William's. And what if William remembers a groom named Mackenzie better than you think, or happens to take a good look at his own face and Jamie's? 12-year-old boys are not remarkable for their acute perception, and I think that if a boy has lived all his life in the secure belief that he is the 9th Earl of Ellesmere, the notion that he might actually be the illegitimate offspring of a Scottish groom is not one that would enter his head, or be long entertained there if it did. Jamie has known John's secret about his sexuality for years. That's how he has held his life in his hands. They sit in silence while the infusion steeps. Infusions are what we call herbal teas. They are not teas, because they are not tea leaves, since they are herbs. That's the distinction. Claire winds more yarn balls. John breaks the silence, speaking of his feelings for his wife. I told you I had feelings for my wife. I did. Affection, familiarity, loyalty. We had known each other all her life. Our fathers had been friends. If I had known her brother, she might well have been my sister. And was she satisfied with that, to be your sister? You cannot be at all a comfortable woman to live with. John believes his wife was content and happy in the life she had led. He further explains or tries to their lack of children wasn't his fault. I was an adequate husband to her. That we had no children of our own, that was not my... I really don't want to hear about it. Oh, don't you? His voice was still low, not to wake Ian, but it had lost the smooth modulations of diplomacy. The anger was rough in it. The claws are out. It's a cat fight. You asked me why I came. You questioned my motives. You accused me of jealousy. Perhaps you don't want to know, because if you did, you could not keep thinking of me as you choose to. And how the hell do you know what I choose to think of you? his mouth twisted in an expression that might have been a sneer on a less handsome face. "Don't I?" Claire allows him to see everything she is thinking with a bold look. I want to see this scene so much. All this interaction between them, I really hope we get the bulk of it. Gosh, we need it. When his wife Isabel died, he felt nothing. They had shared a bed, a life, many years together, and yet... You mentioned generosity. It wasn't that. I came to see whether I can still feel, he said. His head was still turned away, staring at the hide-covered window grown dark with the night. Whether it is my own feelings that have died, or only Isabel. Only Isabel? I can still feel shame, at least, he said, very softly. Can he still feel? That's powerful. Without the aid of a telephone or other means of communication, seeing Jamie would tell him if his heart still lived. This is really at the core of what keeps John loving Jamie. It's a touchstone of whether or not he's alive, whether he can feel. Remember, I've pondered this over and over as we were going through the other books and the other read-alongs. Why would John continue holding this torch, loving somebody in such a raw way that can never, ever love him back in the same way or in a way that he needs or wants? This is it right here. There isn't anybody else in John's life that he can ask that question. He has no other love, even if he has flings or time with other men. They don't hold that same space. They don't capture him the same way that Jamie does. Claire tends to a restless Ian, then hands John a cup of freshly brewed infusion. Claire wants to know now that he's seen Jamie, does he still have feelings? In fact, he does. God help him. This admission of John's, his need to know if he is still alive, touches me in such a personal way. I had to go through this type of exercise when I was going through a difficult divorce, a lifetime ago it seems. It wasn't with a previous love of my life, or I didn't have one. The person I was divorcing had been the love of my life. But I still had to find out if part of me had died with that death of a relationship. I think this is really human nature and human need that we see here, and Diana has woven it in beautifully and put it in as sort of a hallmark of who John is and what makes him tick, and his loyalty and his friendship. And sadly, it puts Jamie at such a focal point for him. Will he be able to ever meet someone and move on? That's tragic to me. Claire's fitful sleep is interrupted by a noisy Clarence, the mule. A sociable creature, Clarence was utterly delighted by the approach of anything he regarded as a friend, this category embracing virtually anything on four legs. He gave tongue to his joy in a voice that rang off the mountainside. Rollo, affronted at being thus upstaged in the watchdog department, leapt off Ian's bed, soared over me, and out through the open window, baying like a werewolf. John is sitting in his shirt at the table and has a startled look in his eye when he sees Claire get up. Was it her hair, or was it the surprise of the dog? We don't know. Or Clarence, the mule. It isn't Jamie and Willie returning. It's Pastor Gottfried from Salem. He heads up the Lutheran congregation. This must be an emergency visit since it's a 2-day ride for the pastor to reach the ridge. He asks for Jamie, and he doesn't speak English. He speaks only German. He becomes more upset and starts rattling off German phrases Claire doesn't understand. Lord John jumps in, asking questions. Claire is thankful he put his pants on for the conversation. The pastor is scandalized by a man being in the house that's not Claire's husband. Lord John quickfires many things to the pastor. The pastor, in turn, apologizes to Claire. John translates the Mueller baby and daughter are dead from the measles. Claire is sad and upset. The pastor wants Jamie to reason with Gerhard Mueller. Claire explains Jamie and Gerhard aren't friends. Not exactly, no. Jamie hit Gerhard Mueller in the mouth and knocked him down in front of the mill last spring. A muscle twitched in Lord John's scabbed cheek. I see. I suppose he's using the term reason with rather loosely then. Mueller can't be reasoned with by any means more sophisticated than an axe handle, I said. But what is he being unreasonable about? After a lengthy back and forth in German with the pastor, Lord John can translate the outbreak also entered the backcountry. Indians showed up asking for a drink and kindness. Mueller gruffly sent them away. The Indians obliged, but seemed to have hexed the house on their way off the premises. Mueller believes it's the fault of the Indians. Measles showed up the day after their visit. When Petronella and the baby died, Mueller vowed revenge. He and his sons went looking for the Indians and brought back scalps, which he hung from his barn door. Mueller intends to come to the ridge next. Claire is horrified by this knowledge and becomes as pale as the pastor. After more translation, the pastor has no idea Mueller would want to see Claire. After Mueller had returned with the scalps and said he was setting out to Fraser's Ridge to see Claire, the pastor set out after him and found him by the road passed out from drink and no food. Instead of rousing Mueller, the pastor flew like the wind to Fraser's Ridge to warn Claire and Jamie. He's a hero, this pastor. Seeing Jamie gone, the pastor is worried for Claire. The pastor urges Claire to leave right away, but she cannot because of Lord John and young Ian. To make it worse, the pastor hasn't had measles and is in danger if he enters the cabin. Claire thinks about the scalps on Mueller's barn, and her hair actually stands on end. Claire's scalp is rippling with horror. Lord John assures the pastor he has been a soldier and will take care of Claire and it's safe. He has to do this because the pastor will not leave without John's assurances. And the pastor blesses them as he rides away. Claire pauses to notice the autumn morning and what nature has to offer. Who did Mueller exact his revenge against? Did he go into an Indian village? Likely those he murdered would have family who would want revenge in return. Those who might seek out the killers may only know white men were responsible. Fraser's Ridge is between the Indian villages and the Mueller's farm. Claire utters aloud a thought. Oh, God, I wish Jamie were here. I wasn't aware that I'd spoken aloud until Lord John replied. So do I. Though I began to think that William may be far safer with him than the boy might be here, and not only by reasons of the illness. Shh. That brings another problem. Hopefully Jamie doesn't return prematurely. Looking at John, she orders him back to bed. He is still weak and not ready to be up and about. John doesn't protest. Claire tends to young Ian and listens for another announcement that more company has arrived. Claire is paranoid at every sound, but eventually she gets into her normal routine on top of taking care of young Ian. Lord John even helps with shelling beans. Claire would like to simply walk into the woods to be surrounded by nature within its confines. She could recharge and be unafraid. She doesn't give in to temptation as the sun sets on the ridge with no signs of Mueller. When she returns to the inside of the cabin, John asks for details about Mueller as he eats a meal, though refusing the greens. Remember Jamie pulling greens in Voyager while at Ardsmuir and John being baffled? Claire made him a salad. I totally love that. Not even the 1800s, and she's making him salad. That's why they have pretty teeth still. And good iron. Claire explains Mueller's physical and personality dispositions. She likens the man to a mule. Well, Gerhard Mueller is a mule. He's not really bad-tempered, and he isn't precisely stupid, but he doesn't pay a great deal of attention to anything other than what's in his head, and it takes a good deal of force to switch his attention to anything else. Though Claire hadn't been present for the altercation at the mill, young Ian had described to her in detail what happened. He had insisted Felicia Woolham, one of the daughters of the mill owner, shorted him on flour. Young Ian, unable to dissuade the man, fetched Jamie to help. Jamie tried to reason with him to no avail. Jamie resorted to physical violence to stop him. At that point, Jamie gave up trying to reason with him and hit him, I said. He had at first been reluctant to do so, Mueller being nearly 70, but rapidly changed his mind when his first blow bounced off Mueller's jaw as though it had been made of seasoned oak wood. The old man had turned on him like a cornered boar, whereupon Jamie struck him first in the stomach and then in the mouth as hard as possible, knocking Mueller down and splitting his own knuckles on the old man's teeth. Wow. After dragging Mueller outside to one of his waiting sons, Jamie spoke to him while Woolham rebagged the flour into 5 sacks. And this was to Mueller's satisfaction. Claire doesn't believe Mueller held any ill will and was kind to her when she attended Petronella's labor and birth. She nearly chokes on her food, remembering Petronella and the baby are gone. John gives her ale to drink. She counts her blessings from the small pleasures around her, the warmth of the sun, the smell in the fresh air, and the reality these things were abruptly taken from others who barely knew them. She opens her eyes and thanks John. He looks at her with sympathy. She thinks she shouldn't be so shocked at how precarious life is, for the young especially. She finds herself with a tear rolling down her cheek. John gives her a used handkerchief to blot it away with, but she doesn't care. John makes a statement to Claire. I did sometimes wonder what he saw in you, he said, his tone deliberately light. Jamie. Oh, you did? How flattering. I sniffed and blew my nose. When he began to speak of you, both of us thought you were dead, he pointed out, and while you were undoubtedly a handsome woman, it was never of your looks that he spoke. To my surprise, he picked up my hand and held it lightly. You have his courage. That made me laugh, if only half-heartedly. If you only knew. He didn't reply to that, but smiled faintly. His thumb ran lightly over the knuckles of my hand, his touch light and warm. He doesn't hold back for fear of skinned knuckles, he said. Neither do you, I think. I can't. I took a deep breath and wiped my nose. The tears had stopped. I'm a doctor. So you are, he said quietly and paused. I have not thanked you for my life. It wasn't me. There isn't really anything much I can do. For something like a disease, all I can do is to be there. A little more than that, he said dryly and released my hand. Will you have more ale? I was beginning to see quite clearly what Jamie saw in John Gray. I hope beyond hope this is shown unfettered on screen. It is imperative the building of their relationship is able to happen outside the books and on our televisions. I so hope so. The rest of the day wore on without incident. Young Ian is in full rash with a lessening fever. Claire is reminded it's milking time. Up she gets and opens the door and steps right in front of Gerhard Mueller. Mueller is looking at Claire with great intensity. He looks shrunken, older, and weary. He appears without horse or mule, and standing up takes effort. They greet each other. He sounds desperate. Mueller says, "They are dead," with tears welling in his eyes. Claire wants to reach out and comfort him. Leading her to the bench near the door, they sit. John has come out to see what is going on, pistol in hand. He hugs Claire, weeping silently into her. Claire puts her arms around him. She notices the varying stench on his person. All she can do is hold on to him even though she is repulsed. When Mueller lets go of Claire, he starts at the sight of John. The rash on John's skin is what causes the alarm. Mueller frantically checks Claire's skin. He thanks God her skin is clear. John further translates the words. He says he was afraid that he would be too late, and is glad that he was not. Claire said, seeing my bewilderment. He eyed the old farmer with suspicious dislike. He says he brought you something, a charm of some kind. It will ward off the curse and keep you safe from the illness. Babbling in the German tongue, he places the item on Claire's lap. John continues to translate. Mueller thinks Claire a fine woman and like a daughter-in-law. John's voice trails off as the item is fully unwrapped. Claire shudders and cannot make a sound, though she opens her mouth. For the cloth slipped suddenly to the ground, spilling out the sheaf of white-streaked hair to which a small silver ornament still clung. With it was the leather pouch, the woodpecker's feathers, draggled with blood. Claire can only hear Nyaweni's translated words in her ears. Her name meant, "It may be, it will happen." Now it had, and all that was left me for consolation was her words. She says you must not be troubled. Sickness is sent from the gods. It won't be your fault. That is heavy. Remember when Gabrielle translated for Naiweni? And that's what she had said. As well as the other prophecy of Claire will come into her full power when her hair is white. So Claire has lost a friend. Claire has spent the last days caring for John, young Ian, and the entire homestead alone. A possibly firm foundation is built between John and Claire. They now have something outside of Jamie that is solely theirs. The alarming appearance and news from the pastor further bind them together. She needs John's translation and protection regardless of how weak he still is. When Mueller shows up broken, in sorrow, and with a gift of protection, the outcome is an utter surprise. Claire not only mourns the death of Petronella and the baby, but her Tuscarora friends, especially Nyaweni. Her heart must be breaking into many pieces. The final reminder of the old woman's prophecy rings in Claire's head. So now we know where the scalps came from, and that Mueller, in his vengeful rage, just picked whatever Tuscarora he saw nearby. Chapter 29, Charnel Houses. The smell of smoke hits Jamie before the Indian village comes into sight. He sends William to hide off the path with the horses. He can investigate what is happening. Jamie instructs William with directions to leave if he is not back by dark. He further instructs William to leave toward the ridge if he doesn't meet up with him in that spot by morning. William is scared, but only listens. Jamie sends him on his way. So it's a two-part thing. Stay in this clearing until dark, and if I'm not back, then go to this other point, and if I don't see you by morning, go back toward the ridge, and he gives him directions for both. The smell of fire is something out of the norm. Jamie cautiously investigates. He sees the remnants of the village with smoke still rising from the leftover buildings. A thick brownish pall of smoke hung over the forest. As far as he could see, he took a deep breath, coughed, and hastily drew a fold of his plate across his nose and mouth, crossing himself with his free hand. He had smelled burning flesh before, and a sudden cold sweat bathed him at the memory of the funeral pyres of Culloden. His heart sinks. Who could do such a thing? The winds shift, pushing the smell of burned flesh into his face. He vomits. This smell and scene are too familiar to Jamie. A dog that he knows comes from the distance. Jamie asks him where the people are. I love that, him asking a dog where his people are. The dog's owner, Onakara, walks toward Jamie. The man doesn't answer Jamie, rather has him follow into the forest where survivors are a half-hour walk away. Some faces are familiar, others are not, and far too many were missing from this camp. Their faces remind him of the highlands during the cleansing. He had seen this before, and the ghosts of war and murder dragged at his footsteps as he passed. He had seen a young woman in the highlands sitting on the doorstep of her smoking house, with her husband's body at her feet. She had worn the same stunned look as the young Indian woman by the sycamore tree. The difference is this had been an orderly exodus from Anauka. Jamie finds Ncognito. After composing himself, the old man asks after Gabrielle and Naiweni in a descriptive manner rather than by name. Jamie shakes his head. He doesn't know where they are. They share a strong drink. Jamie understands the customs of conversation, nevertheless asks what happened. The village had succumbed to the measles. Naiweni tried to stop it and went into the woods looking for a charm or a plant or some other way to stop it. Berta and Gabrielle went with her, and none of them returned. There had been a search for the women with no results. Ncognito believes they are cursed, meaning the people of the village are cursed, not the women. He explains the burning of the bodies and buildings. The tribe will now go north to become part of another group. Jamie leaves with grief in his heart and thankfulness his family is safe. He walks quickly to cover the distance back to William as the dark comes. So these two chapters were mostly about Claire and Lord John and what's going on at Fraser's Ridge, and really the dynamic between Claire and John. Like, we don't know what's going to happen from here on out. And the friendship, even if it's fragile between Claire and John, is really important. And the time they spent establishing that tells us even further how important it is. The other thing is, Claire understands that she can't cure certain diseases. All she can do is make somebody comfortable, be there, and help with the secondary infection risks like pneumonia. And And I also wanted to put in here that babies are very susceptible to measles and getting it, unlike, say, something like strep throat, which is very difficult for anyone under 1 to get. Measles is highly contagious to babies. And Petronella, coming down with it and then dying, since she's an early postpartum, that also makes sense. Her immune system is very compromised in trying to recover from pregnancy and labor and delivery. It's terribly sad. And I put a link inside the show notes, my script, for the different herbals, so you can click on them and read about them as well. Jamie is grieving and in shock like Claire, though he knows not the extent of the situation. He's lucky to have hearth and home intact. He has lost a friend in Incognito as the Tuscarora move north to a new home. I wonder how he will respond when he learns the whole story from Claire and John. These chapters show the value of openness of heart and mind, the value of friendship and family, how grief touches us on the periphery and up close. They highlight how we cannot outrun the inevitable too. Nyawene knew her time of death and illness were coming. That was part of her prophecy. And Claire also indicated how hard it is to survive, especially for the young in this place they find themselves, right? So we see relationship building, and maybe that means some foreshadowing for Claire and John that they have to have it together. We see that John uses Jamie as a touchstone to make sure that his heart isn't dead and that there's possibility for him, but yet it's a yoke around his neck at the same time. It's so challenging. I bet all of us do things like that in parts of our life and don't really recognize that's what we're doing. And I loved the humility of Claire. I love how she was feeling pitiful because it's been really hard the last couple of days and she's had to do everything by herself. And it would be a tremendous amount of work. Milking and taking care of the animals and making sure everybody's safe and taking care of the sick and running all the normal things, as well as making food and doing all the other necessary preparations that may exist. And it would be scary also to be there by themselves with 2 ill men. I mean, John was able to help her, but if there was a fight to be had, he is in no way able or 100%. He's at 0.5%, right? But I love how she was humble to how she was feeling pity for herself. And then she looked at John and she saw his grief and could see him thinking about his dead wife and what that meant for him and for William. And if he had never asked them to come to Jamaica instead of him going back to England, she may not be dead. That's a lot to think about. So poor John is harboring a lot of guilt. And I'm glad we got to see that he had a good life with Isabel and that she was content and happy and that he was a serviceable husband, as it were, and that it wasn't his fault they didn't have children. He tried. I think that's adorable. So we do also know that John, though not generally attracted to the female form, can actually have sex with a woman and enjoy it enough in order to procreate if necessary. So those are all details that we need to be paying attention to. I also like the fact that Diana brought in Claire's just desire to want to run off into nature. Like she wanted to go hide in the forest. I do that. Why do you think I hike so much? But she just wanted to run and hide from it and feel safe and put her fingers in her ears and say, la, 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 la. You can't see me and I don't hear you. It was becoming overwhelming and stressful for her. But she acknowledged it and then was able to move forward. That's really something powerful that Claire can do. Are you that way? I find myself that way. I might feel crummy and then I think about it and find a way around it. Because sometimes we just have to do. And I really do wonder, what did she do for herself to escape the pressures in Boston? Hiding herself in the hospital was not the same. as going into nature and being alive. I think she was half dead the whole time she was not with Jamie, and it sounds like he was very similar. Like the spark was just out of them. They did everything they needed to. They took care of who they had to. They loved the best they could, but they weren't really as present as they could have been. At least for themselves. Like they lied about themselves and who they were. They lied to themselves about what they needed. And they just kept going as half people. And maybe they were present for most, but they were definitely not taking care of their own needs and their own selves at all. And then we also got to see the animals, Rollo's interaction and him wanting to be in it and being a good watchdog, and Clarence the mule being effervescent and joyful. I love that mule. I hope we get to know him too. So I find all those things really interesting that are going on. And we can see conflict and rising action and all these different types of literary devices being used. And I loved how it was so surprising of what Gerhard Mueller really wanted with Claire. He was so worried for her that he went there. His revenge had been spent. And then what was left was his worry and concern over Claire on the ridge, and that he'd be too late and she'd be dead, or Jamie would be dead, or Ian would be dead. So I loved that. It was so unexpected and really showed the other side of the Mueller the mule, is that he's deeply passionate and loving, and sometimes he doesn't really see what's going on around him. He flows with what's within him. That was really tender and really sweet, and she couldn't withhold from him knowing he had hurt others and knowing he had taken revenge. But knowing that her friend is now dead is pretty traumatic and difficult for Claire. So I do have an email to read. And like I said, thank you for so many of you commenting. I will not be doing a Claire accent because all the books are in her own voice. Unless I read it wholly in Claire's voice, it's not going to make any sense now, is it? So thank you for your feedback, and I will continue on otherwise. And I think it has worked fabulously up till now in the other way. And we'll go from here. So from Meredith, chapters 28 and 29, email message. I very much like this rather heated discussion that Claire and John have. In fact, I would describe it as liberating, particularly for John Gray. Claire tells John that she was born to be blunt, and John replies, so was I. And yet he isn't open about anything, is he? Yes, it's a bit ironic, isn't it? How many secrets does he harbor? I'm not just talking about his sexuality, although that's a part of it. But think about the John Gray books. He's a spy. His whole life is about secrets. He wasn't born that way. The British of the era were very repressed when it came to emotion. Remind you of another culture? For me, the Vulcan culture comes to mind. I sent you an email comparing a few of the Outlander characters to Star Trek. Lord John is very similar to Spock. Both keep their feelings to themselves no matter what. And they both have a sparring partner who tries like hell to unmask them. I have no doubt that John is just as envious of Claire as she is of him. But I think he also adores her because she is one of the few people he can actually be himself around. Ooh, that is a good catch, Meredith, for sure. Even Jamie won't let John do that. He may know his secrets, but Jamie will never encourage John to be forthcoming about people John gets involved with or his feelings toward him. Claire, on the other hand, wants to know about him, and for John, that's rather exhilarating. You know, I think you're right. I don't think there's another person in all of the books that John can be as bold-faced himself, but to Claire. Wow, I hadn't seen that. That's amazing. Very good catch. What do the rest of you think? I think Meredith is onto something here. I really love the moment when Claire confesses in her thoughts that she's beginning to see clearly what Jamie sees in John Gray. I'd like that to be included in a voiceover on the show. I don't get why Diana Gabaldon didn't include a goodbye with any of these characters. Why is that? It's like she didn't want to bother with it. I assume that will change in the episode. Books are ongoing, but shows are segmented, so I can't imagine that the writers want to include a scene where John and William say goodbye and depart. Sincerely, Meredith of Everett, Washington. Thank you. That was such a great email. I appreciate you, Meredith. It's so cool. Yeah. John has many attributes of Jamie's, but he and Claire are also very much alike. Makes a lot of sense why they both frustrate Jamie to no end, but he likes them both very much. And Jamie is ultimately uncomfortable with John's sexuality. Like, he accepts him, but he doesn't want to hear about it. He doesn't want to hear how he feels either. Even though Jamie is more demonstrative with his feelings. I have to think on that a little bit. What do the rest of you have in mind? And Meredith posted a note on the website post about maybe I misunderstood what she meant about John being able to bet a woman. Well, maybe he wasn't expecting her to really enjoy it that much. And maybe Isabel could have figured out that he wasn't really that interested. I don't know. Perhaps. I see John as being very sensitive, though. And even if he wasn't, like, totally into her, that he could have sex, enjoy it at the base level, and finish the act. So, as he said, it wasn't his fault that they didn't have kids. So I think he would have displayed to her a genuine like, and he would really want her to feel good. So I don't know. That's a really interesting posit. A wife who loves her husband would be watching for that special something, and Isabel might have started to feel that his attention was elsewhere. And I hate to point this out, but it's entirely possible that John cheated on Isabel with a man. I know that he's a very moral man, but let's not forget that John Gray was apparently banished to Ardsmuir because he had a male lover and got caught. Yes. You're right. All those things could have happened, and I hadn't taken them into consideration. So maybe Isabel picked up on it, or did they sleep together out of comfort and kindness and expectation, but it wasn't necessarily about passion and love? There's a lot of reasons people get married, and they did not get married for love, those two. They got married so they could raise William together and give him a home and an intact family. And there was some politics involved with their families, and the Dunsaneys trusted the Grays. So I think it's more complex than passionate love, and maybe Isabel fell in love with him. I mean, I could. He'd be really easy to fall in love with, wouldn't he? He's amazing. There's a lot to ponder here and unpack. What do the rest of you think? Do you think Isabel did fall in love with him, even though we don't know for sure? We know that they liked each other a lot and were very companionable, so, I look forward to hearing from the rest of you on this. So what's coming up? Next week, we are tackling chapters 30, 31, 32, and 33. There's going to be a lot. I chose so many chapters because they aren't very long. I could only do so many pages and fit it into anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes of a podcast. How can you participate? Be sure to send your comments to contact@adramavoutlander.com or call the listener line at 719-425-9444. And I thank you for your voice messages about the accents and all your notes. Comments or messages may be included in the podcast or the written post. Where can you find a Dram of Outlander? Well, there's a pretty decent-sized Dram of Outlander community going on social media. On Facebook, there's the big page, A Dram of Outlander. There's also the A Dram of Outlander group. You need to ask to join. And there's 3 little questions to answer to make sure you are not a bot. I really only want real humans in there. No robots, please. And the difference between the group and the page is really run by me. I get to post. It's difficult to see anybody else's postings on there unless you're following a specific thread. But in the group, you guys get to interact with each other fully and ask questions and bring in other content. It's not strictly only about Outlander. Many of us like period pieces, so we talk about Poldark or other things going on. I'd like to point out that on April 8th, Howard's End is coming to Stars. I know it's probably a limited series, but I'm excited to death about that. Again, period pieces. My poor husband. I like action-adventure. I like fantasy, which can be any time frame, but I love, love, love historical period pieces. He knew what he was getting into when he married me, I swear. I didn't surprise him with it all. You can also find A Dram of Outlander on Twitter and Instagram at Dram of Outlander without the A in the front. And the website, of course, is adramofoutlander.com. So please pay attention to the goings-on. And I will have the contest up in the next couple of days. It's a beautiful thing. I just haven't been able to get it done yet. And you can also support the podcast by sharing the podcast, sharing the posts, engaging with each other on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, talking to me, sending in your feedback, giving me your comments, questions, and thoughts. Please, I love to hear from you. I make this podcast for you. I'm going to reread the books and take notes regardless, but I really do this for you. And I appreciate you listening so much. And the other way that you can support the podcast is financially. And thank you, Francis, for your contribution. I appreciate you greatly, and every dollar counts. Patreon.com/adramofoutlander. If you'd like to do a small monthly offering or any size offering, or you can contact me if you'd just like to send a one-time to help out. So thank you so very much, and happy Tartan Week. Until next time, slán je va.